Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less Do More. Today I'm joined by Rhiannon Hiles, who's the Chief Executive of Beamish Open Air Museum. Beamish is one of our most loved and most visited attractions in the northeast of England. I really wanted to talk to Rhiannon today about her journey from volunteer to Chief Exec at Beamish, looking through the past, the present and the future. Rhiannon, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I think, from my point of view, I think you must have one of the best jobs in the world. Chief Exec at Beamish, brilliant open air museum right here in the northeast. Is it the best job in the world?
Yes, obviously it is. But just to me, it was the job that I kind of dreamed of from when I was in my early 20s, and now I'm a little bit older. And I've worked my way up through the museum. It was my career. So
how long have you been there now?
30 years next year.
Wow.
I only came to the museum for some experience. I'd finished my first degree and I was doing voluntary work in museums, and I'd worked at TWAM, Tyne-and-Wear Archives and Museums, done lots of visitor tracking around many places, the Hancock, which is one of my favourites, which is now the Great Museum of the North, and I was doing voluntary work at the Gulbenkian Oriental Museum in Durham. Yeah. And I always visited open air museums, but for some reason hadn't linked that you could also work in them. I don't know why. And I'd gone to, I was very lucky, my grandparents took me abroad to see open air museums and to travel when I was a teenager. And I'd seen lots. They always took us to like folk life. They were very interested in the folk and social history of each country we would go to. And so we looked at lots. So I'd seen the ones which are now influences for me, leading an open air museum. And as Vice President of the Association for European Open Air Museums, I'm now going back to those places that I went with my grandparents and having a little moment, I went here with Granny and Grandad. And then thinking, actually, you're really lucky because you're getting to work in one back in the north of England, which I'm very proud of. And I feel like I'm championing what Frank, the first director, always wanted, which was to have a museum of the folk of the northeast telling their story as disappearing communities and industry were then what they were leaving behind and how communities were evolving and changing. So when I first, back in 1995, thought, I could maybe work at Beamish. There was no jobs advertised. So my uncle knew someone who worked at the museum, and he said, give Jim a ring and see if you can get some voluntary experience there. I was like, I don't think they'll have me. But I rang him up, I was like, could I come? He said, come and meet the senior keeper, Rosemary Allen. And I'd heard about her. I knew she was like an incredible knowledge, particularly on northeast textiles. And went down to see her at then Beamish Hall, which was where our archives were then. It was owned by Durham County Council then. And went in very, very nervous. And I was like, I'm here to see Rosemary Allen. And there she was. And I was like, meeting the great Rosemary Allen. I was really, really like, and she's stirring a cup of tea and she's like, what is it you want to do? I was like, can I just volunteer? She said, we'll give it a go. As if to say, it's not going to work out. But as soon as I started volunteering there, even though I'd been volunteering in other museums, which I loved, but there was something not quite there for me. And I think it's because I'd been doing lots of collections-based things, and I'm very much a people person. And the traditional museums I like to go and visit, but I like to be very involved with people. And at Beamish, I was able to combine those two things and do all the social history. This story, how can we then use this back out in the museum? So I got to quite quickly as a volunteer, work alongside curators and the collections team. And I would always put my hand up and say, can I come with? I was probably really irritating. Like, girl, I wish you'd go away. Because I thought, can I come with you? Can I listen too? Could I be part of that? Could I learn from you? So there was one brilliant chap called Lloyd Langley, who is a great oral historian. And I was really interested in learning about the stories of the people of the Northeast. And so one of the first projects that he said, you can come along and you can watch me. So I went along and we interviewed people from Merling. We interviewed the white mice, or some of them, who were being the paintresses at Merling. And after the third one, he said, do you think you could handle one of the interviews yourself? And I was like, I'd love to give it a go, but I don't want to let the person down. I was very conscious that I was walking into their home, I was going to interview them about their lives. And he said, well, it'll be fine. I'll be there and we'll give it a go. And I just it was like I was like, this is amazing. I just wanted to do more of that. And I jumped from that one into saying, can I do another one really quickly? And I then went and interviewed a chap in Sunderland who'd worked in the Merchant Navy, but his stories, the Merling White Mice stories, were memories of Lucy Bullermeyer and the companionship and the painting, and it was all quite uplifting, and she was showing me pieces of mailing ware. And then when I went in, so I went off that thinking, oh, it'll all be like this. Went to interview this old chap who'd been in the Merchant Navy. He lived in Sunderland, and he was really unhappy, and he was really sad. And me going in, bringing the memories, made me, and I thought I've done the wrong thing. And I came out of that interview thinking I'd let him down, I'd let everybody down. So I came out, and he primarily said, Rhiannon, it's not about you. It's about that person and how you've made that person feel. And actually he was upset, but look how it ended. It ended with him like, you've actually, you know, I've got through a lot of feelings which he like kept inside him for many, many years. And I thought that how important that was to understand how to manage people's memories and how to be careful with them, and that when you are asking them about them, it's not you, and you need to listen. So quite early on in my time at the museum, I had this feeling and this understanding that handling people's memories was really, really important, and then how that then transfers into the open air museum. So when I'm out and about in the open air museum and I see, it might be a family, or it might be an older couple, or it could be anyone, but I'll always like, how are you doing? How was your day? You know, and sometimes people are they're there because they want escapism. They're just like, I'm just relax, you know, just leave me. And other times you can say that to someone, and then you look at them and you think they're emotional. They've had like an emotional rush as they've gone into a space. And there's many times I've walked in and someone's got a tear in their eye. There's one old boy in the school. I'd gone into the school, and usually when you're in the school, you're in your shirt and your tie, and you're like, hello there, are you ready for a lesson? You know, you're quite like upbeat, aren't you? You're like, I'm taking control of this. And as I walked in to this on this particular day, there's an old gent sitting at the front, just looking at the blackboard, and I thought, well, I'll just carry on, because he's clearly taken a moment. But he stayed while I was talking to people, and then I went over and I said, are we all right? How are you doing? And he was crying, and he said that had been his school, but the memories weren't good memories. So when he'd come in and sat down, he was having memories of school times when he said he was bullied. He said he'd had a pretty awful time at that board school when it was where it originally stood. And it reminded me that not every story is rose-tinted. Not every story is going to evoke happiness. It's going to, like that chap back in Sunderland, who was sad, and it was bringing out all sorts. And I think the context that Beamish has and the spaces that we create generate a variety, so many layers of responses and how people can feel. And therefore we have a massive responsibility to support people when they come into the museum. And that's really important to me, that we aim to get that right. We strive to get that right, but knowing that because it's people, it's not always going to be right. And when I'm talking to staff or volunteers or training them, I always say you can do your best every day, but if something happens, it's the situation that you happen to be in, and it's how you respond that's the most important thing. And at the end of the day, most of the time, it's the people just want to talk, or however they want to express themselves when they're in the museum.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That you've sort of made me think about the museum in a different way, even in that sort of short description, because you tend to think of it as a place where you can go and experience what it was like, but you forget that for some people their experience might not have been a positive one. So you're sort of like a curator of memories rather than looking after buildings and dressing up in outfits. It's you know, like you say, there's a real responsibility comes with that. I think it's a really, really insightful about how you approach it. But you've been there for 30 years. You started off as a volunteer. How did you end up moving out of the volunteer space and actually becoming an employee to start off with?
Yeah, not long after I'd started volunteering, the seasonality of the roles came up, and there was an advert. And funnily enough, I saw the advert in the Northern Echo, not in the museum, it was a long time ago. But I was having a look through, and I'd seen it said Beamish demonstrator, so I rang up my uncle's friend Jim, and I said, I've seen that they're now actually, and he said, well, quickly get your application in. So I applied for a demonstrator role. They're called demonstrators then. Over the years, I changed it to engager, because I felt that demonstrator was I'm instructing and didactic, and I thought that engager meant that, you know, it was a reciprocal like dialogue that you had. But that was a bit later.
But that's certainly the experience when you go. You engage with the people that are there.
Yes.
You don't go to be instructed.
No.
Yeah.
No. And once I'd started as a demonstration, was working out in the exhibits, it was clear to me that the word demonstrator wasn't quite right, and it didn't sound right. And it conjured up for me, you know, when you used to go into Phoenix and someone was demonstrating how to use a pan. That's a demonstrator.
Food mixer.
Food
Knitting machine.
Yeah. And I thought, that isn't what we're doing. But I thought, sometimes we are. We're showing the action of.
Yeah.
But we're about the sight, sound, smells, tastes, and the immersive experience. And people can experience it in whatever way is comfortable for them. And the visitor might not necessarily feel that they've been given a deliberate route to see the museum, but we think quite a lot about how people participate around the spaces in the areas that they're not maybe dwelling in or going to. One of the first places that I was involved in thinking about how people use the spaces was Pockley. So when I've been a demonstrator for around about 6 to 8 months, roles started to be advertised for things like assistant senior demonstrator. There was interpretation assistants, and I was just like, oh, which one am I going to go for? And I thought, well, I like working with the people. I'm still volunteering with the collections. But I think my quest, I felt even then that my quest was to be in operations, was to be out there with the people, talking about the history and thinking about how people use the spaces. And there was a role came up that I went for and got, which was at Pockley, which is assistant senior demonstrator.
And Pockley is
beautiful.
For people that don't know or haven't been to Beamish, but
just Pockley's an original part of the museum. It's a Georgian farm. It's always been there. There's a much older house attached to it, which is a strong house, which was built in the 1400s. And that's also always been on site, and it's cited in lots of texts as being a really important piece of northeastern history. People think of strong houses and tower houses as being more Northumberland, and they think of the border reivers, but there were predominantly quite a lot along what was then flexible border that people would build. You'd lock yourself in and get your best cow in there and then hope you weren't going to be raided. Not necessarily by the border reivers, but maybe by your neighbour even, because it was quite a rural area. So it's a stunning part of the museum. It looks down across, away from the main part of the museum, and you have to walk up towards it. We've recently just opened a Drover's Tavern there, which is absolutely beautiful. And there's a pottery there. And so that's deliberate to draw more people up into an area which is stunning and beautiful, but because it was just on the outside of the main visitor area, didn't always get footfall. And when I first started working back there in 1996 as assistant senior demonstrator, I was conscious that it was beautiful and stunning, but people didn't always seem to be coming. And I thought, well, there's lots of visitors in the town area, why are they not coming up to Pockley? So we were thinking about how we got people to use the space, how you would signpost without using modern signposts to encourage people to use the spaces. And I found that really, really interesting. So that work that I'd done at Tyne Archives and Museums, tracking visitors round, I thought, actually, I can see how that transfers into, even though it's a very different type of museum, an open air museum, so that you can help the visitor and guide them round what a Beamish is, a very, very big space, without them feeling that they're being instructed or told where to visit and where to go. I find all that very intriguing. It's like a jigsaw for me. I love it. And I love that it's a jigsaw that maybe has always got a few bits missing and you're like, how can I make those bits improve? Where are they? I love that. I love to be doing that.
And it's incredible listening to you. It's so much more than just a visitor attraction. It's a historic collection.
It is.
Happens to be buildings and areas and all that sort of stuff. But it's so much more than just a visitor attraction. It's a real precious thing that we have in the region that we need to look after, and because it preserves what could be lost very easily. Yeah. So you obviously have worked your way up through Beamish, and one of the things that you did that I think is absolutely fascinating is that you used to live in Beamish. And until we had a conversation relatively recently, I didn't even realise that was a thing. I didn't, in my mind, hadn't pictured what it was like when it was shut and who was there and who wasn't. So you lived in the 1900s
town.
In the 1900s,
I lived in the 1900s. I lived the life.
But you lived there for like 16 years or something, didn't you? It was like a long period of time. This wasn't just like, you went and stayed there on a weekend. It was
It was a really interesting time living there, and I felt like Beamish was my home. The whole place, it was my home. It was amusing if you ever had deliveries and things like that. And I couldn't get the delivery there. And when I had my daughter, everyone kept saying, "Why you're getting a lot of visitors from the midwives and the health visitors? You get more than I did." And I'm like, I think they're coming because they're it's Beamish. And they would arrive at the entrance and they'd get the tram down and they're like, we're just going to see Rhiannon. And there was one lady who used to come and see me, like really, right? She used to bring her son, he'd go on the ice, we had an ice rink then in the wintertime, and she'd leave him on the ice rink while she came to see me. And I did begin to think, I don't think people have this, unless I'm not looking after my daughter properly, I don't think people get this many visits.
This level of interest in what's going on.
Yeah.
So what was that like living there? So presumably when the gates shut at the end of the day, what did you do?
Well, not
on the merry-go-round on your own.
Some things I just can't possibly say. We did sometimes do things which we maybe shouldn't have done. Like we would go down. I've been down the Helter Skelter when it's been closed. Me and my friends would be like, just go down the Helter Skelter. But I was brought up in quite a rural part of County Durham, and although it is different in Beamish when the gates close, because obviously even if you're in a rural area, a car will probably go past, or you will hear a siren, or you will see or hear something. Whereas Beamish, it does go very suddenly, like there was thousands of people in and now there's nothing. But when you get used to it, it's a really lovely spot. It's absolutely beautiful. The wildlife there is stunning. One evening we were it was a summery evening, and the sky was absolutely beautiful. And I looked up, I was like, what is that? And there was a hot air balloon, which must have, well, it lost its way and it came down in the park in the museum. And we were like, ha! So I running up going, are you all right? What's happened here? It's like, I didn't mean to do this. I hope this is, I was like, oh, it's not your fault. They just completely lost their way. But you saw lots of really unusual things. But also I was an events officer at that point. And so part of the reason why I was living there was so that I could be available late nights, early mornings for when we had events. So quite often I'd be letting in like soldiers dressed in 1940s soldiers outfits and making sure they were camping, or I'd be letting in horse boxes and things. And it was never really particularly dull, I have to say. It was always interesting living there. My daughter always says to people that she was born there.
Born in the 1900s.
Born in the 1900s. And she's volunteered since she was born. She did, yeah. So I used to. I had a lovely little outfit that I used to take her out in when she was a baby, and then as she got into be a toddler, we just kept giving her more and more things that she grew into. And she's always volunteered at the museum. She just has been brought up as part of the museum, so I think she's always lived the life.
Oh, that's lovely though. That she's still got that affinity for it now.
She does. Yeah. Well, she's 12 now, and she's a bit like, sometimes she go, "Oh, mummy, I don't want to come today. Is that all right?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, it's absolutely fine." And then the 50s has really inspired her, and she loves coming in and wearing 50s outfits. So she quite likes the 40s as well, but she always wears bibs and braces for there, so she prefers to come in and do 1950s. I can remember when she was a baby, I'd first gone out thinking, "Oh, she can just come with me when I'm out and about." And I got onto a tram, and I was sitting on the tram in my Edwardian, I had an Edwardian hat on, I was holding Jessie, and a lady had said, "Oh, little baby, oh, she looks lovely. She goes, can I hold her?" And I had this moment where I thought, oh, she's my baby. I don't want
her. She's not a prop.
She's not a prop. And I suddenly thought, am I using her and it made me think, am I using Jessie as a prop? What's going on? And I was like, oh, she's just sleeping. She'd be right. And so I managed to get out of not handing my baby over. But it did make me think about how that might be perceived, the way that I was I using Jessie even subconsciously as part of being as the immersive experience? Somewhere was I thinking there isn't enough babies in the 1900s town, which is probably right for a 1900s town. It doesn't quite have that richness of what you would have found there's no street urchins and kids begging on the street. It's a bit rose tinted at times, but sometimes you've got to be careful how you handle those stories.
But I suppose for you, it was probably also childcare.
And childcare.
Yes. Because I don't imagine there's many nurseries in Beamish.
No, and that's something that I've been thinking about recently, because we have a lot of staff who've told us, and during cost of living issues as well, they've said, actually, I don't know if I can afford to work. And I thought, how can we help you further to be able to work? So first of all, I was like, I'm going to build a nursery. Right, we'll build a nursery in the museum. And then I began to look into that. I asked someone who runs nurseries. They said, you do know that's trickier than it sounds. It's not as easy as just opening up the band hall and saying, that is a nursery. And then I thought, I know what to do. We'll speak to someone on the periphery who already runs a nursery, and there's a little school at No Place, great name, which is just up from Beamish. And so I went and spoke to the head there, and I said, is there a way can we partner? Can we do something? So that hasn't actually come to fruition yet, but she's really keen. And it'll also open up access as well. She was saying that a lot of the families that use that school and nursery the kids don't go anywhere or do anything. And so we've talked to her about having a partnership with free entry for the children to come down, the families to come down to Beamish. So there's other conversations we can have. But if I go back to the challenge for our staff, I think that if we can think of ways to enable them and help them, then I want to do that as much as I possibly can.
How many have you got on the team now?
There's 560 staff. Some of whom, as that fluctuates a little because of seasonality. There's 560 at the minute, and then just over 360 of the active, I think it's 360 active volunteers. I never get the numbers exactly right.
That's a heck of a lot of costumes.
It is. It is.
And you have an in-house costume department.
We do. They're brilliant.
Because you wouldn't be able to find all of those in charity shops.
No, you can try.
Looking.
You can get some things in charity shops, but as we go further back in time with the Georgian area, that has to be produced. It's got to be made. 1950s is a little easier, but what we tend to find is that staff will come in saying, "I've been buying this. I think it's a bit 50s," and then you have to very politely say, "It is, but it's a bit Americanized, and actually we need to make sure we're telling the right story." But I love that people have got that interest in what they're wearing and want to compliment, or they'll buy a hat and say, "Does this look right?" There was a lady in costume the other day. I'd gone in to pick something up in the costume team, and there was a lady in there who'd ordered something off Amazon. She said, "I've ordered this. What do you think? It's for the winter to put on my head." But it was bright, like almost pillar box red fur. But the team were great. They were like, "It looks sort of right," that they handled it in the right way. They're like, "Bring it in when it arrives and we'll just see whether it's going to be appropriate." But generally speaking, they produce everything and guide what people are going to wear. If they do decide to bring something in of their own, they'll guide and say whether or not it's going to be appropriate. But they make most things. The Edwardian suits and the tailoring is highly skilled, and they do all that, and they're brilliant at it. And the hat making, they did milliners courses so they could do all the Edwardian hats and the Georgian hats, and they're absolutely beautiful. Got lots of stores full of costume.
But what I love is that you've progressed obviously through the chief exec, but you still go out every day wearing whatever costume for whatever bit you're going to be most in, and I think that breeds like real authenticity about the experience, but it also means that your team can see how passionate you still are about that. What's your favourite era? What's your favourite outfit? Just popping in to say, if you are enjoying the conversation so far and want to make sure you keep up to date with other episodes, then please hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Let's jump back into the conversation now. What's your favourite era? What's your favourite outfit to wear? You've got a lovely 50s hairstyle today.
I do. Done this morning.
For those who are on audio, Rhiannon has a lovely, is it a chignon?
Chignon.
A chignon, which has been done by one of her the costume team.
That's right. And a dress for the day. So yesterday I was wearing Edwardian, and that's one of my favourite. I do love wearing Edwardian. But I think about where I'm going to predominantly be. So yesterday I was predominantly in the 1900s town. So I thought I'll wear Edwardian. Likewise, if I know I'm meeting guests in the 50s or the 40s, I'll wear according to where I am. Sometimes it'll end up not being right. And if you're showing people around the whole museum,
you've got to pick one.
Yeah,
you can't keep getting changed every time you get off the tram.
Exactly. And as we've changed eras and skirts have got shorter, it's been a little bit more practical for me for a daily basis if I'm showing people around to wear 40s or 50s, because then I'm not worrying that I'm going to trip over the long skirt. And as I'm going around with people up and down hills or up and down off vehicles, it's easier. It's easier for me. But then I do feel odd if I turn up at Pockley not wearing a Pockley outfit. I always think, I feel a little bit out of kilter. So I've devised this way that I have it. I'll say I'm just time traveling, and visitors think that's quite funny as well. They'll have a little laugh with you. And the staff are on board with that as well when they see me, because they're not going, "Rhiannon, you're not wearing the right costume." They'll say, "Time traveling today, Rhiannon?" And I'm like, "I am indeed."
But it must give you a bit of an insight into what it was like as a woman in those different time periods. And like you say, practicality of wearing a full length skirt. Yeah. What's that like? Do you sort of assume a character when you put on the
Probably.
Yeah.
I think probably, yes. I think we were just talking before we came in about confidence and how hair, makeup, what you wear can give you a confidence. I do feel different according to what costume I'm wearing. For some reason, even though it's long, when I wear the Georgian costume, I feel very kind of like, right, what we're going to be doing today? I feel like we're going out to do some work because it's quite workaday costume. I although I have them, I never wear what would be the lady of the house costumes, because it's not my thing. I don't really like to wear them very often. They've got big, and actually probably wise, because I'm a very gregarious, like to be out and about person. And those costumes with they were called pork bonnets. They were designed that women couldn't see out of them. And why would women need to? And it protected the woman's complexion if they were near any heat or any sun, so you didn't get any sun on your skin. And so you were very like constrained. And I think that's why I prefer the working costume when I'm at Pockley, because then I feel like I can be in amongst it. And I suppose when we're in the Edwardian and we don't tend to do Victorian, we do a Victorian school session. Obviously women would have worn much different underwear as well, which would have made them feel even more different and probably hungry because they didn't want to eat, because they might have all tied up in their like stays and everything. So I think you do feel different in your outfits, but I don't think you can actually say that you've experienced what it would have been like for a woman back then fully. Yes, the tripping, yes, having to wear the high neck blouse and all the rest of it. You've got that aspect, but you haven't got the additional, and there were constraints, and women, I would have, not having it fully experienced it, it will have been quite uncomfortable most days. When we first opened up some Christmas experiences at the Wagonway, about 10 years ago, we trialled all wearing full-on Victorian outfits, which were actually really designed to be worn over corsets and things. So it's quite, they didn't look quite right. They weren't hanging quite right on us, because we weren't all like, but they gave us all the like, I can't remember what they're called, the bustles and things. They gave us those to wear underneath, and going to the toilet partway through the day was really difficult, because you were like, geez, why? And it made me think about like what women were having to experience and go through. Nothing like what they really would have, because you're not actually doing that, but it would have been very different, I think. So I think I have a different, I feel, it depends on how I feel each day. I'm quite a like, what's today like? What am I going to wear today? According to, so I like all of the costumes, to be honest. And it's really interesting thinking about future Beamish now and what costumes could be like if we did the 80s or the 90s.
God, I don't like to think that that's classed as historical.
I know. But we're thinking about like, there's always something in living history that's somebody. So if we are doing like a 10, 15, 20-year plan, so we need to collect now, then it could be 2024 that we're representing in 30 years' time. So will people be dressed like, you know, you and I, or, you know, what will people look like? What will they be wearing? What will people then want to see? And it'll be interesting. 80s batwing jumpers might be in. Who knows? I've
probably got some relics in my wardrobe somewhere that I can rake out. And the hairdressers will have to start doing perms.
They will. The scrunchie with it sticking up on the top.
Oh dear, I've just got a horrible shudder of memories there. I mean, the 50s bit is relatively new.
Yes.
That's and there's more to come around that as well. And you know, having family members have just been to visit and been blown away by it. Yeah. I think because it's living memory, there's a lot of people who will go there and think, oh, this brings back really, it brings you back to that point in time. For those who haven't been, what sort of things have you got now in the 50s bit?
Yeah, so the 50s we have a cinema, which is, when I go into that cinema, I was in there yesterday with some guests, and they had the same feeling that I do when I go in, because they were just like, and I still have that, partly because it's newly opened, but I don't feel like I'm in Beamish when I'm in there. I could be in a cinema actually about to watch a film in the 1950s anywhere in the north, and I love that you can have that, like, you're transported into something, which is amazing. And alongside that, we've got the toy shop, which is it's rammed every day, and I was a bit concerned that it might displace sales in the gift shop. It hasn't. It's as if we had a gap in the market, and I can't even imagine what it's going to be like at Christmas.
So do you actually sell things in the toy shop? But are they toys from the 50s?
They're copies, so we've worked with external suppliers.
Right, okay, so you've created stock.
Yeah, curate. You used the word curate before, and our commercial team, for me, are curators, and they're curating what is going to be appropriate within the living history spaces, which are still going to be also saleable as well. So they're so creative in what they're coming up with. And there's a little dolls hospital at the back where people would have taken their dolls to be repaired, and it's rather sweet. And then we work with external supporters, funders, business friends, and so next door to that is an electrical shop, which was sponsored by the Reese Foundation, who have got a brilliant programme of support to us that's created roles in our STEM learning. They're also very interested in heritage engineering, obviously, because of their, what they do down on Team Valley. So they've supported that development of a workshop at the back where young people and others can learn about electrical engineering. So that will be used by trainees or volunteers or school placements or college placements, working alongside predominantly retired engineers, I have to say, but people who will give up their spare time or free time to come wear a bit of costume, but also to show people how to do things. So it's a great spot. We have a young man who works in the 1950s who he just lives the life. So he dresses, so people, he's wearing costume. I'm like, no, those are his clothes. He wears it all the time and his hair's done like that. So he put his hand up to be in the films that we've recorded to show in the cinema, and he looks brilliant. We've done 1950s films. But there's a nice cream parlour. You can get your hair done in Elizabeth's hairdressers.
Oh, so you can actually get your hair done in the
hairdressers?
Oh,
yes.
wow.
Which is why they were practising on me today. And I said, sit still and you're going to get practice done, which is fine. I love that. So we have some qualified hairdressers who know some of the techniques, but then others who are learning like as they go on the job, and they're doing brilliantly. And you can have a little Minnie Mouse bow. It tends to be the kids who want that, or you can have a chignon like this one, or a pleat. But it's good fun. And there's the row of it's an original 1950s hairdryer. People love just sitting in there and getting the photograph taken. It's brilliant.
And where do all of the things come from? Yeah. Do people donate them? Do you
Partly.
Go out looking for them? How do you find everything?
So because we're a museum, and you talked earlier about us being such a resource, and we're much more than a visitor attraction, people know to donate things to Beamish. We're very, very well known as being a depository of people's things, or repository. But anything at all that comes in then we have to think about, will it ever be used? So we don't just want to collect anything and everything. And in the past, when the museum was created, it had to collect anything and everything because it had nothing right at the beginning. So Frank had to go out and collect anything and everything of the Northeast, all the social, whether it's a cup or it's a chair, so that he could, because in his head he could see the creation of these contextual spaces, but he needed the things. But then over time, that's meant that stores are busting at the seams, and you try to get everything out into the open air museum as much as possible. So we've become quite clear on ensuring that we collect for the exhibits that we're creating. So the 1950s was interesting because people they'll be cleaning a grandma's attic or a family home, and they'll say, we found this, would you like it? So we had a huge response to, we're going to be looking at the 1950s. And in fact, most of the things that you see out in the 1950s town are donations. And then when there's a gap where you think, we just haven't been able to collect that, then you do have to look at auction sites, or you've got to go out to dealers and talk to them about whether or not you could get something that would be used. Georgian's quite hard to collect for. So when we were developing more in the Georgian area with the tavern and the pottery, we had to think hard about how we would get those items. And we had some in the collections, and we needed to get more of them out. But then some of the other things we had to go to auction to pick up, but then we've got to resource that. Yeah. And so we're an independent museum. We don't, other than going out to get support and funding grant aid foundations, we don't get any of the funds. So we've got to think about where we place that money in a sensible way.
I've got a question from my dad.
Yes.
So my dad's a big fan of Beamish. And the last time he went was to see the 50s thing. And he asked the same question of every single person who we met who was in costume.
Yes.
Because he lives in Winlayton. And Winlayton had a forge.
Yes.
Which was dismantled and apparently he thinks was taken to Beamish, but he's never seen it.
Right.
Do you know where the forge
from
Winlayton is?
Well, I'm going to sound like a politician briefly, because I know a little story. So my friend's mum was related to one of the blacksmiths. So in the past, so she's a descendant of a blacksmith from Winlayton Forge. Right. So whenever we're with her, she'll say, Winlayton Forge. And I thought, at the time, have we got it at the museum? So this is really interesting that your dad's asked that. We have bits of forges, and then the recreated forge up at the farm, because that was a forge, but we didn't have the things for it. So it's very possible that the Winlayton pieces are in there. But what more importantly, the museum accessions everything that comes in. So I'm now going to go back to the museum and just have a look on Keemu, which is the collection site, and put in Winlayton Forge.
So what's next? What's next for Beamish?
Yeah, the DeLorean car. I'd love that. I'd love to drive around Beamish in the DeLorean car.
Is that the one that was in Back to the Future?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a chap in concert has one. So if he is listening to this, I'd love him to ring me up and say he's going to come down as a volunteer. But that's in my head, because as we come out of remaking Beamish, which is the museum's biggest project ever, with over 30 new exhibits, with new 50s urban town space, developments up at Pockley, immersive overnight stays as well, so we've got some overnight accommodation. So I started to think about how we could move the museum into future Beamish, and been talking with our board. This morning I was talking with all of our people. I do a monthly catch up with all staff and volunteers, and I was talking to them about what's next. And the reason why DeLorean's in my head is that we put up this image. So one of our great members of staff in the comms team had put the DeLorean in front of the 1950s terrace and done a Back to the Future image above it. And that was my starting point to say, right, we've now got a blank page. What can we do going into the future? And I think that for a period of time, we have to do some boring things. We've got to make sure that the car park's going to take the volume of people. We have over 800,000 visitors. So the infrastructure externally on the main road and then coming into the museum is under immense pressure at times. So we must do something about that. And that'll be costly. But people don't tend to want to sponsor a car park. But if we can get them to sponsor programmes of work, which are brilliant, like our health and wellbeing programme, our learning programme, our environmental sustainability, that people, oh yeah, I really want to help you with that. And we can just move some money sideways and do the things which are a bit boring. Yeah. And make sure the toilets win Toilet of the Year. That's my quest. I want to win Toilet of the Year.
Is there such a thing as Toilet of the Year?
And I want to win it. Really would love it if someone said, you're going to win Toilet of the Year. I'd be like,
what makes it, what will make you win Toilet of the Year?
Amazing toilets. Toilets which are clean, toilets which aren't falling to bits, toilets which have got all the right fittings in them, toilets which are in keeping with the space, they smell good. I have walked into a toilet, two toilets externally, one at Gibbside that had won Toilet of the Year, and I was like, ooh, you can win that. And then at King's Cross Station, the toilets, obviously I haven't been in the men's toilets, but the women's and unisex toilets had won an award, Toilet of the Year. And I thought, well, if they can win it, Beamish can win it.
Reach for the stars.
But quest is to win Toilet of the Year. Why I'm telling you that, I don't know, but that, to me, that's quite important. But we need to stabilise the museum. We need to ensure that the bits which haven't been neglected, but all our focus has been on that bright, shiny new thing with the 50s and the developments of Pockley. And so I want to make sure we've invested in the Pit Village, we've invested in Home Farm, 1900s Town, and a lot of the exhibits are original buildings that were recreated at the museum. Some of them have been up for about 30 years and they're well due a refresh. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean wholly changing the story, but the carpets will need redoing, and they're copies of Victorian ones, but the wallpapers need redoing. You know, the electrics probably need a check. There's a lot of maintenance task work which we've got to invest in to ensure that the museum as a whole is still maintained and is still brilliant, and that will underpin strategic work, going out to people. And I think we go and we talk to them about different stories and how we represent that back in the museum, but also what is Beamish about? What is your Beamish about? What's your dad's view on what Beamish is about? And I love that people will stop me and say, Rhiannon, I don't think you got that quite right. Or I'll be filling up my car, can I just ask you about? Or if I'm because I always have my costume on, and I'll say, what did you enjoy? And they'll say, well, I wasn't too sure about, or how did that come about? Or have you thought? And I love that people have that view that it's their Beamish, and that's right, because we're representing the stories of the people of the North, so they should have their voices heard in that way.
It comes back to what we were talking about at the start. It's about you're curating other people's memories in a way. I mean, I love that. I think it's a brilliant asset for the region. I think you do a fantastic job, and I love the fact that you're sitting with a 50s chignon on this podcast. So keep doing what you're doing, and thanks ever so much for coming onto the podcast to tell us about it today.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed that episode of our podcast, Fear Less Do More. If you did, then please follow or subscribe. If you enjoyed what we talked about in this episode, then you might enjoy this one here, which is also linked in the show notes. Thanks for listening.